All right, I should be live. Hello, everyone. It is Neil here from EDM Tips for this week's, Tuneful Tuesday, hosted, of course, on a Friday because, unfortunately, on Tuesday, my power went out. But thanks, everyone, for understanding. Thanks for all the well wishes. It came back on not too long later, but, yeah, of course, we had to reschedule the stream. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a makeup session today. But anyways, for those of you tuning in for the first time, what this stream is all about is live track feedback. So I'm going to be queuing up track submissions from members of the EDM Tips Radio Ready program and Accelerator courses, and I'm going to be providing my thoughts live and on the spot so you guys can learn a little bit about how to improve your own tracks and what to listen out for in general when listening to a track. For those of you that are in the chat and just kind of, watching, I do encourage you guys to drop your comments, your feedback, your suggestions, and your support in there as well. It's always useful for the students who have submitted, but it's also an incredibly useful exercise for all of you guys watching to just actively and analytically be thinking about what might make a song better. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we're going to get into the stream. There are loads of submissions, so I'm going to try to, keep up a pretty solid pace. The good news is behind that is what that usually means is when there's loads of submissions one week, the next week is a relatively light. So I'm already going to tell you guys, if you're interested in getting a little bit more in-depth track feedback, make sure you submit for this upcoming Tuesday's stream as well. I have a pretty decent guess there's not going to be quite as many, so we're going to have a little bit more time to spend on each particular track. If you guys are interested in getting track feedback and you're not part of the Radio Ready program or the Accelerator, all you need to do is enroll in one of those, and you can learn more about those courses via the link below in the description of this video. So with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get straight into it here. As always, as I start kind of playing some of the music, if you guys don't mind letting me know if my voice volume is, sticking out clearly enough against the actual volume of the music, that'd be great. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So the first one was going to come from Wesley coming out of our Radio Ready program, but Wesley, unfortunately, it looks like this track was not found. I do see that you included the private tag, so maybe the link changed or something. So I would just say, if you don't mind, just, resubmit for next week and we'll be good to go then. So officially up first then is going to be a track coming from Tommy G out of our Radio Ready program, and he's saying, I made this anti-war song. It's hardstyle, and my goal is to make it as aggressive as possible. I kindly ask, is this possible to make even more powerful? And if yes, how? This time I'm saying a YouTube video just to have fun with you all, my classroom brothers and our great teacher. Cheers there, Tommy. I feel it's more personal this way, and this war is more personal for me as it's very close to Poland. Absolutely. Let's see what we got going on here with Firepower.
Hot, my Glock's fire, AK straight from the Russian Empire. Russian Empire. Russian Empire.
Science has promised us bombs 1,000 times more powerful.
Glock's fire, AK straight from the Russian Empire.
Good start here. I'd say one of the first things, since you're talking about making it more energetic, more powerful in general, I would focus on bringing out a little bit more bite in the vocal. And some high-end coloring EQ or a tool like Fresh Air by Slate Digital will both help with this. It'll help bring a little bit more airiness, a little bit more presence and bite to that. Nice work with the synths. Love the YouTube video portion of this, by the way. So I think one thing that we could do to make this a little bit stronger, if you do want just more power in general, is really bringing out those upper harmonics. So like the low end and the low mid of your track are about as powerful as I could imagine them being. But what I would probably like a little bit more of is some of those upper mid harmonics on that top end. So feel free to drive the top drums a little bit more. Some extra saturation on the hi-hats would help. And then just a little bit more saturation on the lead synths, or I guess the most foreground synths themselves, for the sake of bringing out that extra brightness would also help. Couple of suggestions in the chat, and I would probably second them as well. I think we could go for a little bit more power from the pit. Now the top kick is actually in a pretty good spot, but I think we could get a little bit more low-end thump. So if you've got like, a low-end coloring EQ to boost that up, that would help. I think that's probably your best bet. Otherwise, just some general saturation on that kick should also do the trick. All right, really nice track here. Great energy. I think the writing and the composition and the groove is all exactly where it needs to be. You've got a great selection of sounds. It's really all about just kind of polishing up, getting a little bit more energy and bite out of that mix. Awesome. All right, well, let's give it up for Tommy G there. Up next, we got a track submission from Yaniv coming out of our Accelerator program. And Yaniv is looking for feedback on the break and the drop at around 220. He's saying, this time I did it in 140 BPM and used a 7th chord. What do you think? Yeah, let's see what we got here, Yaniv. Awesome vibe with the piano so far. I like that little sub drop that you have in there. That's a nice transition point. So far the composition, the sound selection of the mix is awesome. The one thing I would say is around like the 3-minute mark or so, I want to hear one other texture come in there, whether it's like some sort of fast-driven hi-hat or percussion or noise or effects or Foley, something in there, because the ARP by itself just feels a little bit empty. I think you could also benefit from having a little bit more width on that ARP. Don't get me wrong, it already has some nice width to it, but by spreading it out even wider, you're going to create more space for that snare drum to really cut through in the middle. Good composition here. I think the biggest thing that I'm noticing is that there's a little bit of like low, mid, and mid-range mud going on in this track. In terms of what's causing that, let's see. There's like this low mid bass like patch. It's not quite a bass, but it's playing on the offbeats, like we're getting a boom bada boom bada boom bada boom bada sort of pattern to it. And that particular layer is a little bit too loud, and it's driving a little bit of extra muddiness in that. I would also recommend bringing up the thump of the kick a little bit more and a little bit more of the sub bass relative to everything else in the mix, just to really solidify that power. So by boosting up that extreme low end below, say, like 80 to 100 hertz or so, and then by dialing back some of that information in the 100 to 300 hertz range, you should end up with a much cleaner mix in the end. Awesome. All right, well, fantastic work on that entire section there, Yaniv. Again, really great composition. The biggest thing, like I said, is, just kind of focus a little bit on cleaning up some of the mix and some of the layering. A little bit more, EQing among some of those layers would also probably help. All right, let's see. So let's give it up for Yaniv. Up next, we got a track coming from Michael out of our Accelerator program. And he's saying, hey, Neil, I would really like some feedback in general on this track. Would also like some pointers on how and where to improve the mix. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate this. Cheers. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what we got with When Your Days Are Rough. So good compositional start. Michael, the first thing I would say is I think a little bit extra just saturation across the board is going to be your friend. I think you've chosen the right elements. You don't necessarily need to layer a lot more, but the mix does sound a little bit thin, and I think that's really just because of a lack of heavy saturation. The thing about these sorts of mixes, right, when we don't have a lot of elements and when those elements themselves are relatively thin, it can create this really nice sense of space, but without that extra layering, it does end up feeling like it lacks a little bit of power. So loads of saturation can be a really great tool for that. These vocals sound really, really nice. I do feel like the rest of the mix and the instrumental is a little bit lost to those vocals. So I would suggest bringing up the drums a decent amount in volume. You could probably bring them up like 6 to 10 decibels to like really get them to stand out in front.
When it gets dark at night, You'll find me by your side when tears fall from your eyes.
Some of the notes in the ARP aren't quite working with the notes of the vocal. It's really close, but I would probably recommend like trying to transcribe the vocal melody yourself so you can kind of get an understanding of what the notes, you know, are being played there and what could work in the ARP layer as a result. And then try to tweak the ARP layer to match that vocal melody a little bit more closely.
Been better since you're in it, so it kills me when you don't feel enough. Your heart's the purest I've ever seen, so it kills me when your days.
Now, in terms of like, you know, the content of the mix, I do think you can leave pretty much all of the atmospheres exactly as is. I think those are perfectly balanced in the mix against the vocal. It's really going to be about bringing up the drums, the bass, and any, I'll let you know in this next drop if anything else needs to come up. So like your rhythmic synths, I think, could come up a little bit more. So I hear those like chord steps, those could also come up in volume. Awesome. Yeah, I'd say that's like really the core of it. And then the final thing, I guess you could bring up a little bit more power in the sub bass, the low end of the kick, and then sidechain your other elements a little bit more heavily against that kick so that we maintain a really strong groove through and through. Overall, beautiful track, though. Again, the composition is you know, really solid. The one thing being that, you know, the tonality of the ARP versus the vocal in that midsection. All right, well, let's give it up for Michael. And up next, we got a track coming from Diego from our Accelerator, saying, "Hey, Neil, hope all is doing well. I'd like some feedback focused on mastering the track. It does sound good to me, but you are the man." All right, thanks very much, Diego. Yeah, let's see what we got on the master for this track ID. So the first thing I'll say is just, you know, kind of like listening to where it's at in the intro and seeing this waveform, I've got a suspicion that you've got a little bit too much of a volume difference between these sections. Now, you could potentially, you know, just smash your limiter harder to the point of, you know, bringing this content up, but I would also probably just instead recommend a little bit of just volume automation or just changing the volumes of your break elements so that they're a little bit louder compared to what the drop ends up being. So having heard this content that's come in, I take that back altogether. I think the volume level is balanced well enough against the kick, but I do think everything is a little bit too quiet. So you could probably just push your limiters a little bit harder. And if you haven't already checked the bounce of this song on loudnesspenalty.com, I would be sure to do so. That'll let you know exactly how loud your track needs to be, you know, played back at a relatively even volume on Spotify without getting penalized or without needing too much of a boost. I have a feeling it's a little bit too quiet as is, though. And then for your SoundCloud upload, I would aim to target around like -8 LUFS as an integrated value. Now, outside of loudness, I think, you know, this track is in a great spot. You've got a good sense of space, good groove going on. Seeing in the chat, Philip saying the bass seems to be out of key. You know, I am hearing a little bit of discordance in the bass against the notes on top, but I also know that that's part of your style here, Diego. So I think that you've gotten it close enough that it still works out. But Philip, you're absolutely right. It's not like the bass line is like purely matching it. It creates that little bit of like eeriness and discordance. I just know, Diego, that's like part of your particular style, so I'm okay with it in this instance. Now, one thing I might suggest in that bass line, though, so you play like these lower notes every once in a while, and those lower notes really do create a strong sense of power, and if you still maintain enough of that eerie vibe, then I might recommend playing those lower notes a little bit more common and not playing these high notes quite as much. Awesome. All right. The final thing I might suggest here, so in addition to just some extra limiting and volume, is maybe just a touch of extra saturation across the overall master channel. I felt that the mix was just a tiny bit thin as is, but it doesn't need too much, especially if you're going to be getting some of that out of the limiter itself as you push that harder. All right. Well, great work there, Diego. Up next, we got a track from James out of our Radio Ready program, and he's just looking for some general feedback, so let's see what we got on Running Back. Great groove from the start. I do think we could use a little bit more low-end thump in the kick from the start. The top end of all of your drums sounds fantastic, but I'm not quite getting that weight in the sub range. So just a low-end coloring EQ boost to that kick, probably like 4 to 6 decibels would help out. So nice work with the writing here. I think that the vocal is a little bit, not necessarily masked, but our ears are pulled away from it by the bass. So I'd recommend a little bit more saturation on the vocal, a little bit more reverb on it as well to help give it a stronger sense of space. And then I'd recommend filtering out just a tiny bit more of the top end of your bass so that that vocal can really cut through separate. Nice little stop moment there. There's a great vibe and a good strong sense of drive at this point. If you want to make the song a little bit more dancey, I might recommend incorporating some sort of like rhythmic bass line to this, like something with a little bit of an abrupt that cuts through with a deeper vibe. The sustained respace sounds great, and you can actually keep that in there because most of the harmonics are in the upper mid range, and a nice like deep bass underneath will be what really helps kind of drive the track forward. Just something rhythmic to help play off of some of those offbeat 16th notes I think would really help push this track forward from a dancey perspective. Final thing I'd recommend is bring up your percussion layers just a little bit more. Now, like your core drums, your kick, your snare, and your hi-hat, or I guess your kick, clap, and hi-hat, those are totally fine as is. But bringing up some of the percussion in those offbeat 16th notes is again going to just help out with some of the dancing. All right, really nice work there. Let's see, let's give it up for James with that one. Up next, we got a track coming from Maxwell out of our Accelerator program. He's looking for an overall feel of the track, please. Only level balanced for now. I feel the low end needs to come up, especially with this genre, and I'm working on variation for the bass line. I went for a Boris Berecha, I would never know how to pronounce that name, dark techno feel this week. If you could play a little from the beginning and on, and then skip to 3:15 as I'm working on the breakdown that leads into the second half of the track. Still building it out and working on the arrangement. I sampled one of my favorite video games of all time and thought the vocals worked well with this one. Okay, done talking. Thank you. All right, yeah, let's see what we got here, Maxwell. Nice dark vibe to start. The one thing I'll say is, like, in the first 2 seconds of the song, you probably threw out one too many layers in there with that extra, growl and effect suite. Especially given that we're in that kind of like dark techno genre, we have a little bit more flexibility for just like kind of a smooth and steady mix-in style intro. So I would take out 1 or 2 of those initial layers and just bring them in, not too long into the intro. That'll just give the listener like a couple of seconds to digest the initial beat and the core bassline sound, and then we can start adding those extra effects.
This problem in a way that benefits us both.
All right, so really nice work so far. Let's go ahead and skip on to 3:15, working into the breakdown. Let's see what's going on there. There's a really good dark vibe here. two things that I'd suggest. I think we need to bring up the kick drum in particular, and the drums in general just a little bit in the mix. They're a little bit too quiet as is. I'm not quite feeling like the thump of the kick that drives the track, and that is really a core feature of techno, is that's really driving thumping kick. So bring up that kick a decent amount. The other thing is, I think I like the rumbly, washed out sense that your reverb is giving. I think it's just a tiny bit too heavy and has a little bit too much going on in the low mids. So I would suggest either, cutting or low shelving the reverb a little bit below, say like 300 hertz or so, just to clean up a tiny bit of that space, which should be made up by the increase of the kick anyways. I like that kind of top end little flip sound that you've got coming in here.
On your journey, if you can withstand the power surge.
Really nice moment there. Yeah, honestly, the sub bass sounds really great. It really is just the kick that needs to come up a little bit more. Okay, and I'm seeing in the chat you're saying like this is the breakdown section with the kick filtered. Even like right here at this point, and I'm assuming this is like kind of back where the kick comes in. Let me check like right here. It's definitely better, but I still think we could have a little bit more power from the kick, specifically in the low end of that kick. So yeah, bringing up that bottom end with a coloring EQ, I think is going to be your friend there. All right, overall fantastic work here, Maxwell. Great vibe going on. Yeah, way to pull off, another style and another genre. I think you've done a good job. All right, so up next we got a track coming from Jamie, aka Naked Ambition, out of our Accelerator program. He's saying, looking for feedback from about 40 seconds. Want your views on the mix. It's not mastered and a deep house vibe. Okay, yeah, let's see what we got with this one. Cool, so I know you're looking for about 40 seconds and on, but I'll tell you this, really great start to that track. So, Jamie, the first thing that I'll say is it sounds like maybe a mono switch might have been left on. So yeah, Philip saying, is this mono? Yes, indeed it is. If it's not a mono switch, then I would definitely pay attention to spreading your elements nice and wide. The next thing I would say is that I feel like I'm missing a little bit of low mid body. Your sub end's great. Your upper mids above, say, like 600 to 800 hertz are great. But that like 200 to 600 hertz range feels just a little bit empty to me. So I might suggest, pitching down your chords, or at least layering in another note down there, or adding an upper harmonic to the bass line, just something to kind of help fill up that low mid range a little bit more. I do think that sustained shaker that's in here is a little bit too loud and brittle. I might suggest saturating it a little bit more, but then dialing it back in the mix just a small touch. It's kind of taking away from the groove of the rest of the drums because of its prominence right now. Yeah, agreed with Vamos in the chat there. Fantastic vibe going on here. One thing I would say is there was like a vocal that kind of like went "ay" or something like right around here. Add a little bit more reverb and a reverb throw or delay throw to that to help it really ring out, because it is such a powerful moment in the vocal itself. So just came back right there as well. It sounds like you've got some reverb throw on that, and we just lean into that a little further. All right, well, really nice work here. Let's give it up for Jamie with yeah, great vibe going on. Philip saying nice sounds, but feels a little bit messy when all sounds are playing. I'd kind of agree, but I'm going to attribute some of that to the fact that it's in mono. I bet in stereo that, this might all be digestible. But again, just something to look out for yourself. So if it's, if it is the fact that like the sounds themselves were just mono and a mono switch wasn't turned on, that is a good indication that, just playing around with stereo width should clean things up a lot. Awesome. All right, up next, we got a track submission from Matt's coming out of our Accelerator program. And he's saying, hey, Neil, I'm looking for some feedback on the different transitions in the track. I feel I can place some subtle effects here and there, but the track does feel a bit cramped. I'm having issues with the mid around 350 to 450 hertz during the drops, but can't get it to sit right, and I think it's the bass that's causing that. Any tips would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, let's see what we got going on here with Get Money, Matt. Good groove and vibe so far. Got a little something in my eye all of a sudden.
Get money, motherfucker, get money. Let's get money, motherfucker.
Cool. So I think the vibe of this vocal fits really nice. It does feel a little bit separate in the mix compared to everything else. I would focus on saturating a little bit more and bringing up a tiny bit more of the upper mid. Now I think 6 kilohertz and above is totally fine, but like that 1K to 5K range in particular could use a little bit more boost.
Motherfucker, get money.
Ooh, nice effect on the vocal there. Cool, so really nice vibe here. I honestly don't have a problem with the that kind of low mid range that you'd identify. Yeah, there's some information there. It's not the cleanest, but that's part of the vibe of this track. Like, it is growly, it is grungy and stuff, so I don't actually have a complaint with that. Now, what I would like, though, is a little bit more power and a tiny bit of saturation applied to the sub end of the track so that the sub bass cuts through a little bit further with just a tiny bit of extra upper harmonic to it. You were asking also for some feedback on the transitions. I'm honestly fine with those transitions as is right now. If you wanted to lean into them a little further, you could, add some extra fills. I wouldn't necessarily go for just effect sweeps and stuff because I don't know that you need any more of those. But some big drum fills every once in a while, and in those drum fills, if you cut the rest of the instrumental, then you shouldn't need to worry about overcrowding the track at that point because you're, getting rid of that extra information.
Motherfucker, get money.
Cool. All right, really nice work here. Great intense vibe. Yeah, way to pull this one off too. All right, so let's give it up there for Matt's. Up next, I got a track submission from Ryan out of our Radio Ready program. And Ryan's just looking for some general feedback, so let's see what we got here with Kaiser. So I'm going to just kind of skip ahead into the break since we got a little bit of a mix in here. Nice vibe going on here. I do think that the noise and the drums are a little too prominent relative to the rest of the sounds there. I would just bring up the synths still in the break so that those kind of match some of the energy of the drums a little more closely. Good groove going on throughout the track here. Everything's nice and tight. Great energy between the kick and the sub bass here. I do think that low end could come up just a little bit in general across this track. So that applies to both the kick and the sub bass. But the relationship between those two is great. So, if you've got a kick and bass bus, I would just simply apply a low end coloring EQ boost to that hold bus. Seeing from DJ Vamos in the chat here, drums could use a little bit more, and I do agree they are just a tiny bit tucked back in the mix, so I would just bring those up in volume a decent amount, and that should help out. Let's see, I'm gonna play this other drop here. So this drop works really well because you've done a really fantastic job with that tonal repetition. I think in this second drop, that melody jumps around just a little bit too much. So if you can focus on creating a little bit more repetition and predictability in that melody, I think that'll suit you well. Cool. All right, well, really nice work on this track. Great, like I said, fantastic groove, fantastic energy going on. So let's give it up for Ryan there with Kaiser. Up next, we got a track coming from Tom out of our Accelerator program. And Tom is saying, I made an alternate version of a track that I previously shared here. Looking for overall feedback on the mix. Thanks. All right, let's see what we got with Sundowner Break Stub. Great groove and vibe from the start. Not too much, not too little. So I'm a big fan of your drums right now. The atmosphere is also working pretty well. I feel like there's just almost a little too much competing for the drums in the center. Now, your elements do have a nice sense of width, so I don't necessarily know that you need to like pan those elements more, but maybe a little bit of mid-side EQ reduction in some of the key drum areas, like where the thump of the kick around like 110 hertz is living, where like the kind of body of the snare maybe around 800 hertz is living, and some of the top end drums around like 5 kilohertz and up. Very small reductions in a mid EQ on your synths, I think, will help create just a little bit more space for those drums to cut through. Really nice synth pattern going on here. I like the kind of looseness to the groove. It's not like super predictable, but it's still possible to follow. I think that's working out. So I'd like a little bit more of like a reverb or delay throw on that synth prior to when this kind of final washout happens. Really nice work here. I think we could use a little bit more like mid-range texture coming from the synths. I would try adding a subtle bit of distortion to your chord layers to help just make them a little bit more interesting. We don't want to over-distort them because then it'll begin to compete with the texture of the drums. But right now there's almost a little bit too much of a difference between those two. All right, let's give it up for Tom here with Sundowner Break Stub here. Really nice work. Fantastic vibe once again. So up next, we've got a track coming from Jeff out of our Accelerator program. And Jeff is saying, hey, Neil, you can probably start this one at the 1 minute mark to avoid the DJ intro. Looking for some overall feedback in the track. Trying to find ways I can make it more dynamic, whether you think it needs new elements or just automation at parts. Hope you enjoy. All right, let's see what we got with Wind Cave. I know that was still part of the intro, but that little synth that played that could definitely use some extra saturation and some reverb on it to help it kind of match that, vibey feel of the rest of the track. Lovely vibe here. Jeff. Yeah, beautiful writing here. Great chord progression, good melodies, good sound selection. I think one thing that would really help this track is focus on creating a little bit more width in the low-mid elements of your synths. The top end has some lovely width between like the distance of the ARP, some of those high-end pads and stuff. But the low-mid chords, it's kind of like a piano-like sound. I think if you can spread those out a little bit wider, we'll get just a naturally like warm, hugging feeling out of this track. And then there's that lead synth again, and I think just in general, a little bit more reverb on that synth. I don't think anything else necessarily needs it. Maybe a touch of extra room reverb on the drums to help fit them into more of a space. Yeah, let's try that second drop here too, Jeff. I see your chat. So I think in this particular section, maybe just in general, we could use a little bit more saturation on the drums to help thicken them up. And then for me, like the piano carries a little bit of a melody with the rhythmic pattern and that note, those couple of notes that it plays. It's fighting just a little bit against the lead synth that you've got at the time too, because they both have an active melody pattern. So one thing you could potentially do is just automate utilities up and down in those particular layers so that, you know, from time to time our ears are drawn more to one layer than the other. And I see Philip just dropped a very similar comment in the chat there. For my taste, there are too many melodies playing, can't really focus on one. Exactly that. So, you know, you can also just, you know, mess around with the composition a little bit and only have one play at any given time so that they kind of trade off between each other. But also, you know, just utility automation up and down to like draw our ear specifically to one of those layers at any given time. So, all right, beautiful vibe going on here, Jeff. Up next, we've got a track coming from Philip. And Philip is in our Accelerator program. He's saying, hey, Neil, you can skip the first 30 seconds. Thanks. Yeah, let's see what we got with All My Need. The first thing I'm noticing, Philip, it sounds like the vocal chant in there doesn't quite align with the chords that you had in there tonally. It might be worth trying to rework some of those chords to like match the notes of the vocal or repitch the vocal a little bit there. Now at this point, like everything's working really, really nicely. So another option is to just consider like not playing the chords at the time that vocal chant is playing. Good thump coming from the kick. I think you could use a little bit more out of the sub bass. Now your mid bass I think is in a really good spot, but I could get a little bit more sub end information below 100 hertz on the bass line. The vocal has just a tiny bit too much expression around 4 kilohertz. A very subtle EQ duck around there should help that out. And I might suggest adding a tiny bit of a boost in the information below 1 kilohertz just to help give this vocal a little bit more body. Nice. Love that transition. Great use of that delay. And then the final thing I'd say is I think you could bring up the drums a little bit more in the mix. I feel like they are just a tiny bit too quiet. Oh, beautiful job with this breakdown. So, given the amount of like noise and energy you have coming in the build, I think we need one more thing coming in the drop. So maybe bringing out a little bit more of the top drums, some sort of like big long crash with like a nice delay to it, or a noise layer, something to like kind of help fill out those upper harmonics in the drop a little bit more. I think would help out. All right, well, fantastic work here, Philip. Let's give it up for him with All My Need. Up next, we got a track coming from Mr. Steve out of our Accelerator program. And Steve is saying, hey, Neil, could you go from 50 seconds, please, with any comments on the arrangement and mix, low end and general, please? Yeah, let's see what we got going on with Never Gonna Let You Go. So, this groove is mostly working for me. I think something about the groove of the drums doesn't quite match the groove that's implied by the melodic layers. And I have a feeling like the way I'm hearing it is the drums are a little bit more laid back, whereas the melodic layers have a little bit more of an upbeat beat to them. So you could potentially just take the melodic layers and nudge them to the right a little bit, just a little bit, and I think that should fit me. So the drums are sounding great. I'm getting a nice, thump of the kick. I think we could focus on a little bit more transient behavior in the drums. So I would apply some compression with a long attack of like 40 to 60 milliseconds, a release of around 80 to 120 milliseconds, and then aim for like 3 to 5 decibels of compression and makeup gain. That's going to end up emphasizing the attacks a little bit further via the compression, and can give us a little bit more snappiness and bite to those drums. I do think in the drops that like some of the instrumental content was a little bit lost. I feel like the pads and like those atmospheric style layers could come back in volume a couple decibels, but then all of the rhythmic style elements could actually come up a little bit more in volume, and those rhythmic synths in particular. Kick and bass relationship is working out well for me in terms of the sub end. The mid bass feels just a little bit muddy and loose to me. I might suggest saturating that, bringing out some of the upper harmonics, and then applying a small EQ reduction around like 180 hertz or so, just to help clear up a little bit of that extra headroom. Awesome. All right, well, let's give it up for Steve with Never Gonna Let You Go here. Really nice vibe, good danciness. Up next, let's see, it looks like I was queuing these up too quickly. We got a track coming from Gordon out of our Radio Ready program, and he's saying, hey Neil, I just started this a couple days ago. Not sure if it's too busy at places, or if the song works together. Yeah, let's see what we got here with Wandering into the Deep. Nice start here. Good balance of texture and actual movement. So I will say that that initial impact did come in a little bit loud. I would just dial back the volume of that a touch. The drums do feel a tiny bit quiet in the mix. You could probably saturate those a decent amount and bring them up in volume a small bit. Good groove and good riding here. I think the biggest thing that I'm hearing has to do with the mix. So the low mids between like the piano and the other kind of like mid bass layer that was playing, they're overlapping just a little bit. I think a tiny bit more width to that piano and a little bit less reverb on it would probably help out. I would also apply maybe a little bit of saturation on that piano to help it stand out a little further. So I think anytime you have those big impacts, those are just a little bit too loud in the mix in general. I would dial those back a decent amount because they start to kind of swallow up the other elements in your mix anytime that play. Alternatively, if you want to keep the impact relatively close to where it is, I would just sidechain that impact against your other main elements like the drums, the lead, that sort of stuff. I think there might be a little bit too much reverb on that bass as well, causing a little bit of muddiness and washiness for us in the low mid end. And then finally, I would suggest bringing up that vocal a little bit in volume and adding a little bit of like a mid-range EQ boost around like 300 to 600 hertz in it. It'll help just give it a little bit more body and match the vibe of the rest of the track a little more closely as a result. All right, let's give it up for Gordon there with Wandering Into the Deep. Up next, let's see, we've got a track submission coming from Braum out of our Accelerator program. And he's saying, hey, I'm curious what you think of my track I'm working on at the moment. Recorded the vocals with a IRL friend of mine and having a lot of fun with it. Could you please take a look on what I can improve on the vocal chain? I'm also curious if I should remove or add more bass at the build-up, and I'm curious towards the last build-up. Is it too much? I've added 2 extra variants of it in at the end. Let me know which one is the best. All right, let's see what we got going on here with Vivid. All right, so let's see. Last build.
You can alter your perception. Take a moment, relax, and let this acid baseline guide you to a better future.
Cool. Like the vocals so far. You could probably add a small EQ dip around like 600 hertz and then boost up a little bit more from the 1K to 3K range. That'll help give us a little bit more intelligibility and presence on that vocal. Ooh, really cool vocal transition. Nice. Cool. Really, really great job with this drop. Love the sub bass power. You're technically balanced between the sub bass and the kick, but I would recommend just a tiny bit more thump from the kick just to really help drive those downbeats a little further.
Focus reading. You can make it more
Nice. All right, let's check out some of these other builds here.
You can alter your perception. Take a moment, relax, and let this acid baseline guide you to a better future.
I'd also recommend some delay on that vocal in the break, by the way. It's like we get like a future sort of sound to it. I like the repetition going on here.
Full of positivity.
Nice. All right, let's check out this last one.
Relax, and let this acid baseline guide you to a better future.
I don't know if you need to, you asked if you should remove the bass line from the build to make it more clean. I don't think so. I think you're fine as is. I'm going to just remind myself of this original one. Cool. Okay, so of these three, I think the middle one, or the second one right here, is the best of the bunch. It has just the right amount of repetition followed by some evolution near the end, where it's easy to kind of predict and track what's going on. It's very clear that it's a build at that time. I think in this one, there might be just a little bit too much going on, and in this one, almost a little bit too little going on. So I think that, yeah, this middle one has just kind of the right balance of everything there. All right, well, really nice work on this track. Up next, let's see, we've got a track coming from Blonde Dahlia out of our Radio Ready program, and look for just some general feedback. So let's see what we got with Heatwave. Nice groove from the start. So one thing I'd focus on is just taking advantage a little bit more of the stereo field. Now, don't get me wrong, you've got a very clean mix. It's not like elements are overlapping, but I think we can end up with a slightly fuller and more immersive sound if you take like those chord stabs and spread them evenly wide. Right now they feel like a little bit pan to the right, but not like fully pan to the right. I would take them back to the center and then apply a tool like the wider plugin by Polyverse, which is free, to get it really nice and evenly wide on both sides. Good groove going on, good mix in the drums as a whole. I would like a little bit more thump from the kick to help drive that low end, but the top end of the kick sounds great as is.
Tick. I like tick tack. Tick. 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 I like tick tack. Tick.
Great groove, good sense of melodic repetition going on in that lead so far.
Every day I love the party. I like tic tac.
Nice.
Naughty. Tic tac. Every day I love the party. I like tic tac. Get real naughty. Tic tac. Every day I love.
Cool. Right there, I did feel like there was like a slight lean to the left all of a sudden. I like the break that you have, but I would keep it even on both sides of the mix at that point, or cut it out altogether.
Get real naughty. Tic tac. I like them tall.
Awesome. Yeah, really, really nice work with this track. Great vibe and groove. I think the final thing is that the track as a whole would just benefit from a little bit more thickness. So you could just throw a saturate on your overall master channel, drive a little bit more limiting into the track for some extra loudness. Yeah, and I think otherwise, yeah, you're in a great spot with this one. So let's give it up for Blonde Dahlia there with Heat Wave. Up next, let's see. There was a submission from Melchione, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. It does look like you just kind of like linked to your overall SoundCloud. I'm going to go ahead and play a snippet of this spray, assuming that that's the one because it's the most recent one. But yeah, in the future, if there's like a specific track that you want feedback on, just make sure that you link directly to that one. But yeah, let's see what we got here with Spray. Nice groove and vibe going on here. I think some of the top end textures of this like washy synth that's out to the side are a little bit too pronounced. I would recommend filtering those out a little further to make sure that the lead pluck that you have is still like the kind of top end dominant layer. I also think that the bass has just a tiny bit too much width in the low mids of it, so I would use an ozone imager to tighten that up just a touch. Nice groove and pattern in the chords here. I do think the chords are a little bit too loud relative to everything else in the mix. So dial those back in volume a bit. Really cool movement on those chords. And then finally, the drums seem to be just a little bit quiet in the mix. I would suggest bringing those up in volume, particularly the kick and the hi-hat. I think your snare is close. It still needs a little bit of a boost in the volume to that snare. But the rest of the drums in general do need a pretty moderate to heavy boost. Finally, at that transition moment, I would suggest some sort of like reverb or delay throw just to give us a little bit more of like kind of a washout and carry over into the next section. Yeah, same comments kind of apply to this one. It really is all going to be about balancing the mix more than anything else. I think compositionally, you've got a great track on your hands here with a really nice vibe, good amount of interest and movement going on there. So let's give it up there. And again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering this, like either Melchione or Melchione or something of the sorts. If you watch this recording and you just let me know how to pronounce it, I'll make sure I nail it next time. All right, so up next, we got a track coming from Gabe out of our Accelerator program. And Gabe is saying, I just want to do a quick bass check. I replaced the original bass that had a lot of top end with something a bit more moderate, trying to hit the sweet spot of having presence and still driving the track, but without interfering as much with the other parts. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, let's see what we got going on here, Mr. Leopard Step. Great groove, great intro. I do think this bass line is working out really nicely. There might be a tiny bit too much width on that bass though, so I would just narrow it out a small amount. Great use of like vocal effects in space in this track. I think we could get a little bit more volume out of like the upper mid synth fill that played right before the drop. Oh, and I'm seeing a suggestion from Westlake, maybe a touch more ping pong delay on that ARP-like layer. I think that would be a really nice touch. Good suggestion there, Dan. Oh man, this section's sounding really, really clean. Good work here, Gabe. Nice. One final thing, a tiny bit more of like a low end style impact at that transition might help out, just to kind of bridge some of the gap between like the thump of the kick and this wide empty space. But I think everything else is working really, really nicely here, Gabe. All right. Up next, let's see, we got a track submission from Eric coming out of our Radio Ready program. And Eric is saying, haven't mixed or mastered this yet. Was hoping for just some general feedback around the transitions. Are my drum transients okay? And are there any frequencies that are severely lacking? I'm composing with just headphones. Yeah, let's see what we got going on with Samsara. Lovely vibe going on from the start here. I think that piano could use a touch more saturation and a little bit of low mid body with just a faint bit of coloring EQ to the low end. And then this high pluck layer that's playing, I think could be sidechained just a little bit more heavily against the kick just for an added groove. Mix wise, it's totally fine though. The drums are a little bit too quiet in the mix. I'd bring those up a small bit and then saturate them to help thicken them up. Well, I would also like a little bit more power from the bass. I hear a bass layer in there, and the one that you've got is actually perfect as is, but I think this song will benefit from an added sub bass to just help add some extra low end weight below 100 hertz or so. vibe going on here. So for this vocal, that hoo 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 sort of layer, I would recommend finding a reverb tail that's a little bit longer, that echoes out a little bit while longer. But then side chaining that reverb against the vocal itself just a little bit more. It almost sounds a little bit too washed out with reverb right now. I don't want a heavy side chain, but just like a very subtle amount, like 1 to 3 decibels of reduction on the reverb against the lead vocal itself when it plays would be nice. And then the final thing is there's a little bit of buildup around 600 to 900 hertz in that reverb layer, so I would suggest a small EQ dip around that range too. All right, finally, I just love a little bit more low-end thump in that kick drum. The top end's cutting through nicely, but I'm not quite getting the low-end power in this track that I've been looking for. Cool. All right, really, really nice vibe. Phenomenal composition there. Let's give it up for Eric with Samsara. Up next, we got a track submission from Ian coming out of our Radio Ready program as well. And he's saying the timestamp is in the link. Let's see. Why am I not seeing that timestamp? Okay, around 10 seconds in. Oh, you've already got it queued in, that's why. Okay, yeah, let's see what we got with this no-name melodic house track. Nice vibe. The kick is just a little bit clicky. I might suggest a subtle high shelf EQ reduction to help take away a little bit of that click. Then you could probably bring up the thump of that kick a very subtle amount, like a half decibel to a decibel in the low end below 100 hertz. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, a different kick with a little bit more top-end texture as opposed to just like a clicky sort of kick might be a slightly better fit for this track, just because you have this like very natural and organic feel to the rest of the track. That kick is kind of standing out a little bit vibe-wise. From a mix perspective, your stereo width is okay, but I do think you could take advantage a little bit more of the stereo field for just a little bit of a warmer vibe. So adding a little bit of extra stereo width to your kind of pad layers and then to this ARP layer as well, I think would suit you nicely. Nice little fill there. I would recommend a little bit of a delay on that little clap fill just so it rings out a tiny bit longer. Nice vibe going on here. Cool. Really lovely track here, like especially for being your first melodic house style track. Yeah, really, really nice work there. So let's give it up for Ian there. Yeah, definitely encourage you to finish that one off. I think that's a beautiful track. So up next, we got a track submission from Scott coming out of our Accelerator program. And Scott's saying, I've updated my track since I submitted previously. Can you please check out this version instead? General feedback and also what the sub bass is like, as that is my biggest pain point, I think. Yeah, so let's see what we got going on with Foolish. Nice, strong start, good thump coming from the kick, good mix in the drums. I think you could probably bring up the bass just a little bit more, specifically the sub end of the bass. Everything else is sitting really nice and balanced in the mix though. Now this is bass of this vocal doesn't quite match the space of everything else. I would suggest applying a little bit more reverb to that vocal to wash it out and push it back a small bit in space. And then, you know, just kind of match some of the character of the reverb into the space of your bass and the rest of your mix. Renee's suggesting a little bit of extra width on the synth pad, and you know, I think I'd agree there. A little bit of width would help out. Cool drop. Love that little pitch bend vocal shot. That sounded really cool. Yeah, the big thing for me, I think we really just need more sub bass out of all of this. You know, you're asking what the sub bass is like, because that's your biggest pain point. I do think just like bringing out that sub bass a decent amount more in volume would help. What we really want to do is we want to make sure that the RMS and the general volume of the sub bass is roughly matching the RMS and general volume of the kick, just a little bit quieter than it. And if I boost up my subwoofer, I'm like, I feel a little bit of that sub bass, but I feel the kick a lot more than the sub bass. So we want that relationship to be a little bit closer. All right, overall, really, really nice work, though. Let's give it up for Scott with Foolish. Really cool vibe in that track. Up next, we got a track submission from Peter coming out of our Accelerator program. He's saying, I don't have monitor speakers. I use the Sennheiser HD650 earphones with the Realphones VST, so I would love to get feedback on how the sub bass and kick are coming through. Also, some feedback on the stereo image of things, the high end of the bass plus the cymbal ride that sits over the mono beats at 105. The vocals are samples and have not been recorded, especially for this track yet. Looking at getting that done in the future. It's pretty much the same thing from 212, so no need to go any further than that. All right, yeah, let's see what we got with Boom by Peter. Good start, really nice low end to that kick. Use a touch more saturation on the top drums just to help thicken them up a little bit further. Really cool vibe here. That bass in particular would sound great, nice and wide. I think your kick and sub bass relationship is working nicely. I'm getting a nice thump from that kick, but I'm still getting some solid power from the sub bass. You know, Peter, I'm wondering. Okay, I was gonna say, I'm wondering if this track was left in mono. But I don't think it was. I think I'm hearing a little bit of information on the side still. Okay, so yeah, I'm hearing occasional information on the side, so I don't think like a mono switch was left on, but I do think like this track could take advantage of the stereo field a little bit more heavily. Just taking like, you know, the bass elements, some of your synth elements and stuff, and just pushing those nice and wide, I think would help fill out this track a lot more. Oh, and then you were looking for feedback on the high end of the bass plus the cymbal ride that sits over the mono beats at 105. I missed that. Let me just check that one time really quickly. Okay, yeah, so I think, you know, this kind of just goes back to my previous comment. I do think that just like by spreading that bass nice and wide, you'll free up any bit of like, you know, conflict between those handful of layers, and you'll just fill up the mix a lot more in general. Cool vibe going on here. I think those chords could use a little bit more saturation and a little bit more low mid-range power to them. You should actually be able to achieve all of that just by driving a saturator. If you've got something like Decapitator, just pushing that on those chords a decent amount till we get some extra texture, I think would do the trick. All right, let's give it up for Peter there with Boom. Up next, we got a track submission coming from Dave out of our Radio Ready program, and he's saying, just give it to me straight, Doc. All right, let's see what we got here with Stay. start. Good vibe and everything so far. Okay, so having listened to the drums come in, I think we could use a little bit more pumping on the bass line itself. Or like this plucky bass line that you've got, just to help lean into that groove a little bit further. Done a really good job keeping this mix really nice and clear and wide, because you've got a lot of elements playing at any given moment with a lot of beats to them, but I can still make them out very clearly. So really good job with the mix here. I think we could use a little bit more low mid body in this track in general. Now, I think your sub end is great. Everything above like 900 hertz is great, but that information from like 100 to 500 hertz in particular is lacking just a little bit. So maybe adding a little bit of coloring, EQ, mid-range boosts to like the top end of your bass and the low end of your synths would help fill that out just a bit more. Cool. One other thing I'm noticing about this bass, the top end has a really nice pluck to it, but the low end of that bass seems a little bit more sustained. My guess is that this is the result of like some sort of filter envelope on there that's opening up that filter for each new pluck and closing it right back up, but the cutoff is set high enough that the low end is still relatively sustained. I would adjust that so that the cutoff like really just kind of takes away the overall sound a little bit more, so that we lose a little bit more of that sustained information with each hit too. All right, well, really nice work here. Let's give it up there for Dave with Stay. Up next, we got a track submission from Dan coming out of our Radio Ready program. And Dan is saying, I like your feedback on the mix at 58 seconds, the stripped down part, and at 428, the most busy part. All right, yeah, let's see what we got going on with Oh Mon Amour. Mon Amour. Whoops. Should know that. I studied French for a long time. All right, the mix here is working out really nicely. The upper mid part of the bass might be just a tiny bit too pronounced, so I'd apply a very subtle EQ reduction of like a decibel at most, around like 120 to like 210 hertz or so. And then I think those chords, the wide chords, could use a touch more saturation and a little bit more high end, just to help give them a little bit more energy and bite. Again, very subtle amounts though. All right, let's check out that busy part around 428. Great vibe, good sense of flow throughout this. The one thing I'm noticing is that the track seems just a little bit distant in general, and it's not necessarily coming from volume as much as it's coming from like a lack of high-end harmonics. So I would suggest just saturating some of your elements to bring out some of those upper harmonics a little bit further. Namely, like again, those chords. This R player could be saturated a little bit more heavily. And then the drums could use a subtle high-end coloring EQ boost just to help give them a little bit more bite and edge in the mix. And yeah, sure thing, Eric. Now, one other thing you could do, Dan, to just make this one a little bit dancier, is this ARP pattern that you've got, is every once in a while, like, removing a note or two, so that we get a little bit more of, like, a syncopated sort of feel to it, as opposed to just this constant stream of notes. That's, in part a stylistic choice, so I'll leave that up to you, but I wouldn't, recommend at least experimenting with that, see if you like the feel of it. All right, very nice work. Let's give it up for Mr. Dan with Oh Mon Amour. Up next, we've got a track submission coming from Renee out of our Accelerator program. And Renee's saying, hey, Neil, hope you're good. Overall feedback from about 3 minutes and 45 seconds in would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's see what we got with I Try.
Knows I try to get it right.
Good vibe from the start, Renee. The first thing I would say is that I think that the reverb levels are just a little bit too heavy on the vocal and across the track in general. I would sidechain that reverb against the lead elements, because I think like the tail end is actually in a really good spot, but the front end, like when the vocal is singing, does push the vocal a little bit back in space. We could benefit from that extra presence. Really nice melodic riff here, Renee. Good use of rhythmic repetition, a lot of like motif repetition in that melody, and then some little bit of variation near the end. I think your very low end is working nicely. I would like a little bit more thump from the kick, just to poke out against that sub bass a subtle amount more, but you are really close as is. The one area of the mix that I'd say needs to be filled out a little bit more is like that 100 to 300 hertz range. I feel like we've got, again, a really nice sub end, a really nice like upper mid range coming from a lot of the synths, but a little bit more saturation on some of that bass line to give some of those upper harmonics a little bit more presence, and then some coloring EQ to the low end of the synths I think would also help bring up that 100 to 300 hertz range where we need to be. I think you've done a good job with the stereo width. This track sounds really nice and full. Good use of the echo on that vocal there. Cool. Finally, I think just a little bit more saturation and thickness on the drums in general would be a nice touch on this one to just help give that a little bit of extra power. Awesome. All right, well, fantastic work. Let's give it up for Renee with I Try. And then last but not least, we've got a track submission coming from Eric out of our Accelerator program. And Eric's saying, I'd like some thoughts on section transitions. They're a bit sloppy to me, but I'm running short of ideas. After I fix those, I'll start the mixing and mastering. All right, yeah, let's see what we got here with 3 to 5.
Remember being young and taking chances, babe. So reckless, all we ever did was misbehave. Outside the church with no trees, the wind just blew me right to you.
Ooh, like that vocal delay. Good composition so far, too. I know you haven't really gotten into the mix yet, but I would recommend just, tossing some reverb on that vocal to help fit it into space a little bit more.
So let's do it upright on a Saturday night, over drinking and fight with the love of our lives. Quit our jobs and then move to the middle of the ocean, 'cause we're gonna die anyway.
Nice build. Love this drop too. Great sound selection, good writing. This gives me like Diplo vibes to it. Yeah, really, really great work here.
I was gonna say before it got too late. Next thing I knew, we're with the Saudi on a private plane. Did I miss something?
Now, I didn't have any problem with the transition out. I think with a song like this, because it's definitely in that poppier space, simplicity of the transitions is your friend, right? We want to keep things very straightforward. People are going to be focused on the vocals and the general vibe anyways. So I think that while, the transitions you've got aren't any, particularly complex or anything, they're actually working in your favor for that exact reason.
Over drinking and fight with the love of our lives. Quit our jobs and then move to a shack on the ocean, 'cause we're gonna die anyway.
Nice. Yeah, Eric, I'd say compositionally, you're good to go. You can move on into the mixing stage for sure with this one. Maybe through that mix, some other transition opportunities or other, things will come up in the song. But I think the bare bones of your track are exactly where it needs to be. And it is definitely time to move on to the mix. So really, really nice work here.
Having some moments, having some good times, being with friends.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, that takes care of it for today. Let's give it up for Eric for that last track. And in general, I just want to give a shout out to everyone who submitted. You guys did a fantastic job once again with all of these submissions. Like I said at the start of the stream, I'm kind of predicting that next Tuesday is going to be a little bit on the lighter side. So if you're wanting a little bit more in-depth feedback, definitely make sure you get those track submissions in for next week. With that, guys, thanks very much for tuning in and joining me. Once again, if you're interested in getting extra feedback on your tracks, just make sure you're part of the Radio Ready program or the EDM Tips Accelerator. And if you've gone through the Radio Ready program, you liked it, and you're ready for that kind of next leap of extra one-on-one attention, even more video content and lessons of the sorts, definitely check out the Accelerator. Once again, we've had another stream of students getting some really phenomenal successes, starting to see some, signings to some pretty big record labels, getting some support from some major radio stations and DJs across the world. So everyone on the Accelerator has been absolutely crushing it. And not to, of course, diminish any of the accomplishments from those in our Radio Ready program, because you guys have also been doing a great job. But the Accelerator naturally does offer that extra little bit of one-on-one attention that the Radio Ready program does not. So if you're interested in, stepping up your game a little bit further in the production realm, definitely check out the link in the description of this video to learn a little bit more, set up a call with one of us, and see if it is indeed a good fit for you. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure hosting as always. Already looking forward to this coming Tuesday. I hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend ahead, and I'll catch a lot of you in the Facebook group and again on Tuesday's stream. Cheers, everyone.